Hi, good evening. My name is Mindy Henkin, and I am the CEO of the Mandel JCC. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our beautiful JCC this evening for tonight's program. The JCC is very proud to partner with all the agencies that are listed on your program for tonight's event.
Dr. Charles Small is the director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. He is also the Koret Distinguished Scholar at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Dr. Small earned his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science at McGill University in Montreal, a Master's of Science in Urban Development, Planning, and Economics at University College in London, and a Doctor of Philosophy from Oxford University. Dr. Small has performed research in Montreal, London, and in many cities across Israel. Dr. Small was the founding director of the Yale Initiative for the Interdisciplinary Study of Anti-Semitism, the first interdisciplinary research center on anti-Semitism at a North American university. At Yale, he taught in the Political Science Department in the program on Ethics, Politics, and Economics, and ran a postdoctorate and graduate studies fellowship program dedicated to anti-Semitism research. He has lectured internationally and worked as a consultant and policy advisor in North America, Europe, Southern Africa, and the Middle East. Dr. Small specializes in social and cultural theory, globalization, national identity, socio-cultural policy, and racism.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. Ambassador Forman and other distinguished guests of the panel, and representatives from France and from Germany. I'm honored to be here. I'd like to say a special welcome to my parents who are here, Norman and Judy Small. It's nice that they're here. And I'd also like to acknowledge Sammy and Joyce Apple, who are also involved in the struggle against anti-Semitism globally. So it's nice that they're here as well. So I'm going to start off with a story. It was 1947 in Tel Aviv, and the leaders of the Zionist movement were invited to a special dinner, a very formal dinner by His Majesty's troops. The leaders of the British government at the time in Palestine invited the leaders of the Zionist movement in 1947. It was a very hot summer night in Tel Aviv, and you know Tel Aviv can be stifling hot and humid, and this was before air conditioning, and everybody was formal attire. It was an official British evening, so people came in gowns and tuxedos and top hats, and everybody was very warm. And the leaders of the Zionist movement with the leaders of the British government were on the head table up on a podium. And David Ben-Gurion and many Israelis, as you know, are quite informal. So in the middle of the dinner, David Ben-Gurion was very hot, so he took off his top hat and he took off his tie and undid his shirt, and he put the jacket on the back of his chair. And the governor was turning all sorts of colors. He was very upset, and he wrote a note very angrily, and he gave it to his assistant, and the assistant marched over to Ben-Gurion, and Ben-Gurion opened the note, and the governor said that this is an international travesty, this is going to be a diplomatic problem, and that you have to put your formal attire back on immediately because this is a great insult to His Majesty. So Ben-Gurion wrote back, "It's okay, Winston Churchill said it's fine." He gave it back to his assistant, and the assistant gave it to the governor, and when the governor read this, he became even more disturbed and upset, and he was red. Anyways, as the dinner ended, the governor stood up and he made a beeline for Ben-Gurion, and he said, "What is this? This is an international diplomatic insult, and I'm sending a telex right after this dinner, and there's going to be a formal problem with the British government and the leaders of the Zionist movement, and what do you mean that Churchill said it's okay?" And Ben-Gurion said, "Yes, it's true. Churchill said it's fine." A few months earlier, they were at 10 Downing Street in London, and the leaders of the Zionist movement were meeting with the cabinet of the British government, and Winston Churchill was at the head of the table convening the meeting. And in the middle of this meeting, it was an unusually warm spring day in London, so Ben-Gurion undid his tie and opened his shirt up a bit and put the jacket on the back of his chair. And Winston Churchill turned to him and he said, "I don't give a damn what you do in Palestine, but here you put your jacket and tie on immediately." So, to me, this reminds me of the way the Jewish people used a little bit of chutzpah and creativity to survive. And we've used education and our capacity to think to survive, and not only to survive, but to do well when societies permitted us to do well. And I would say to you that today, in the words of Elie Wiesel, who's the president of our small research center, he said that today we're living in a time of a great urgency when he was speaking about anti-Semitism. And then he went on to correct himself, and he said, no, we're not living in a time of great urgency, we're living in a time of a great emergency. And this is what Elie Wiesel said in 2003, and he went on to say that he's never been so concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism since the end of the Holocaust. And coming from Elie Wiesel, who is a scholar, and I think he sort of exudes the humility and wisdom in the great rabbinical traditions, I don't think he's an alarmist. He's a serious, rational thinker. And this was in 2003, 11 years ago, when he said this. And I think that the message that we have to speak to as a community, I think this community has to stand up to the anti-Semitism, not just in the Middle East and not just in Europe, but the anti-Semitism that is here amongst us, in our communities, in our streets, in the finest institutions that this country has created. And I'm thinking in the universities, in the media of record, and yes, even in institutions of power and government. And we have to remember in a way that I don't think we should be ashamed, because we're not just parochial when it comes to anti-Semitism. We know in our history, in the history of anti-Semitism, that once this disease is unleashed on society, it affects not just the Jews. We may be the first victims or the first intended victims, not always the first victim. But once anti-Semitism is permitted to enter into society, into our universities, into our media, into our government, into mainstream popular culture and discourse, that this hatred begins with Jews, but it never, ever, ever ends with Jews. Ever. And this is the lesson that we as a community need to speak about, and those who claim to be liberal, and those who claim to be concerned about human rights, and those who claim to care about democratic principles and notions of citizenship need to take heed that we can't allow anti-Semitism to infect our societies, because this is a human rights issue. Once this disease is unleashed, women, gay people, religious minorities, moderates become the target of the extremists and the anti-Semites. Today, we are witnessing Muslims are becoming the greatest victim of anti-Semitism, because we in the human rights community, and we in the media, and we in the intellectual community have remained silent while this radical, reactionary movement is gaining power throughout the Muslim world, but also in the Western world. And we are living in a moment where I think we've lost track of what's good and what's evil, and we need to speak out for the truth. Anti-Semitism, I'm going to be very crude and give you the history of anti-Semitism in about 100 seconds, so please bear with me. Anti-Semitism, in a sense, has gone through three major phases. There was a religious phase, a racist phase, and now a phase in which the notion of Jewish peoplehood is being attacked, i.e., the demonization of the Jewish people's notion of peoplehood and our connection to the land of Israel and to the state of Israel. What is remarkable about anti-Semitism as opposed to other forms of discrimination is its inherent, and I'm choosing my words carefully, its inherent genocidal aspect. And it's genocidal because what the anti-Semites want to do is transform the Jew. And they want to transform the Jew to save the world. In quotations, to save the world. So when religion was the dominant way of perceiving reality, the Jew was the quintessential other. The Jew was the group of people that committed deicide, that not only would not accept the Christian notion of the Messiah, but they were responsible in the eyes of some at various points for the death of the Messiah. And people believed that if the Jew was basically blinded by evil, that they couldn't see the truth, they couldn't see the light, and that they were blinded by evil, so they were shut off from anything good. But what was remarkable about this anti-Semitism is that people believed that the Jew had to be changed and transformed and accept the Christian notion of the Messiah in order to save themselves, but also in order to save the world. So the salvation of the world was bound up in the fate of the Jew. And we know what the results of this were, not just to the Jews, but to European society, to Christian society, that allowed this hatred to go unchecked. When the dominant way of perceiving reality was through the lens of race and ethnicity and of nation, Jews who lived in places and communities for many generations, for many centuries in some cases, suddenly found themselves to be the outsider again, but based on nation and race. So what people perceived the Jew was poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race, and this contaminant had to be removed. So unlike during the period of Christian domination, there was no way to convert your race because we were born, socially constructed notions were bound up in the way we were born and our genetic composition, if you will. So the Jew had to be removed from society to save the white, pure race and the purity of the nation. Today, the demonization of Israel has, in some circles, not only brought upon jihadism. If you remember, I think the discourse is beginning to change, but there were people, I was thinking of a McGill University graduate named Mr. Brzezinski, and other advisors to this administration, who believed that if only the stubborn Jews would change their policies, that this would somehow dissipate radical Islam and somehow dissipate jihadism and bring peace to the Middle East and peace to the world. So again, if only the Jew, the stubborn Jew, would change their policy, somehow miraculously world peace would break out in the Middle East and spread throughout the world. And this, in my view, is a form of anti-Semitism, the dehumanization, the demonization of Israel. So on the one hand, we have radical political Islam, and when I speak about radical political Islam, it's very important. I am not speaking about Islam, and I am not speaking about Muslims. I'm speaking about a reactionary political force that is gaining strength in many Islamic countries, but also in Islamic institutions throughout the world. And this reactionary social movement is demonizing the Jew and demonizing the Zionist and demonizing the Israeli and putting focus on the Jew and the Zionist and the Israeli. And over here, they're taking away the rights of women, the rights of gay people. They're taking away the rights of minorities, of Christian minorities, of moderate Muslims who want to live in a democratic space of society. So when they focus on the Jew, they're transforming their society. And this is the danger of anti-Semitism. And in a sense, I would argue that the radical political Islamists are the shock troops for the anti-Semites in the Western world. They're the shock troops of the anti-Semites in the Western world because they're straightforward and honest, and they speak the same language in English and French and German and Arabic and Farsi. They say it the way they see it. They're not putting spins on it. It's we in the West who claim to be liberal, who claim to care about notions of democracy, who claim to care about human rights and the dignity of all people to be equal in front of one legal system. It's we in the West who have remained silent while this radical reactionary movement is gaining strength, and we, some of us, have put the focus on Israel. and blaming Israel for the cause of the problems. Western democratic values, multicultural societies are inherently based on the recognition of the other. Emmanuel Levinas, the great Jewish philosopher born in Lithuania, did his PhD in France. He was in France while his family were being liquidated in Lithuania, and he survived the war. And in a sense, he brought Jewish philosophical ethics to the European university, and he paved the way for other thinkers and philosophers. He's a very important thinker, and his work was based on the ethics of seeing and perceiving and treating the other, and that this was the foundation of democratic liberal societies. And Levinas, using Jewish ethics, wrote how the moment we see our face in the face of the other, once there is this recognition, this is the instant we become human. So the recognition of the other is integral to human relations and societal relations in democratic societies. And philosophers, multiculturalism as a policy and as a theory and a philosophy comes out of Emmanuel Levinas's work. And he writes, importantly, and others have written as well, when we see a social movement that is incapable of recognizing the other, in this case, radical political Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, as one offshoot of this social movement, they perceive Jews to be emanating from the urine of donkeys, that we are the descendants of animals, of apes and of pigs. So it's impossible to negotiate, it's impossible to have a democratic society where there is this social movement that perceives the other as non-human. We know from history, from the history of anti-Semitism, from the history of apartheid and slavery, of segregation, that once we don't see the other as human, this can lead to all forms of catastrophes. And I have to say that this reactionary movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, if you go, this is where radical political Islam started, even in the Shiite world. And I would urge you, as a community, if we know from our history that knowledge is power, we have to read what these people are thinking and what they are doing. We need to know the language of the Muslim Brotherhood. We need to know that the founders, Banai and Qutb, perceived Jews as animals. They took the most pernicious forms of European anti-Semitism and incorporated into their notion of religion. They took the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the forged document from Europe, from France or Russia, depending on which history that you read of the protocols. And the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the lies about the Jews, lay the foundation for the Holocaust. And hatred and the Holocaust begins with words and it begins with ideas. And this lie about the Jews, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which led to the Holocaust, as Elie Wiesel and others prominently say, the Holocaust did not happen when the railroad tracks and the crematoriums were built. They started to happen when the words and the lies were accepted as truth. Today, the Muslim Brotherhood is the greatest purveyor of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. They've incorporated the protocols into their religious doctrine. The protocols today in Islamic countries where the Muslim Brotherhood is active is today a mainstream ideology, a mainstream view. And we in the West, in Europe, in the United States, think that we can engage these Islamists because they're more moderate than ISIS or ISIL. They're more moderate than Al-Qaeda because they think through political processes they can come to power. They look down upon the beheading of ISIS and they think they can come to power through other means, through political means. But the goal and the ideology is the same. The root is the same. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a problem. And we have to, in this postmodern moment, if you look at postmodern thought, 1 minute, 2 minutes?
1 minute.
2 minutes, okay. In this postmodern moment, when European philosophers wanted to go away from binary notions of we and they, of us and them, and we created this notion of postmodernity after World War II and after colonialism, that people like Edward Said and Michel Foucault championed the Iranian Revolution. And these are the main thinkers. This is the canon in today's university, are people like Michel Foucault and Edward Said, who speak nothing about anti-Semitism and actually praise the Iranian Revolution as something akin to what the French Revolution was to Europe at Enlightenment. This is what we're dealing with. I would just like to finish, and I would like to say, and this is the dangers, and this is the danger, and this is where I think our community needs to stand up. And we need to educate our policymakers. We need to educate our leaders and the like. And I'm thinking, there's many examples, but the most recent example that I find disturbing is that when President Obama addressed the General Assembly and he praised the Imam, or Sheikh, bin Baya. Bin Baya is a close associate of Kawadari. They work for the Kawadari Foundation. They're funded by the Kawadari Foundation in Qatar. They are the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. Kawadari literally praises Hitler's work and urges Muslims to finish the deeds of Hitler. These are direct quotes. If you read the Hamas charter, they call for the killing of Jews, and they've incorporated the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And yet, the American administration and other leaders, other countries in Europe and the like, have taken a soft approach to the Muslim Brotherhood, and have actually praised them for their condemnation of the war, the horrific war that ISIS is leading. But what's very important that I think that we need to understand is that ideology is very important. And if Western governments are praising the Muslim Brotherhood and praising leaders of an organization or a religious movement that wants to exterminate Jews, kill gay people, kill Christian minorities, kill moderate, non-believing Muslims, then we are in trouble. Because if we praise these people with this ideology, it's giving voice to the people, not only in the Middle East, it's giving oxygen, if you will, to what's happening in the streets of Europe. It's giving oxygen to the Islamists in Europe and in North America. And we have to understand that contemporary anti-Semitism began with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews. And I work closely with people like Bassam Tibi, Haris Rafiq, prominent Muslims, practicing Muslims, who know that praising these Islamists are destroying their own societies, they're destroying their mosques, they're destroying their societies. And they're very active in fighting against radical political Islam. So if we are, as a community, concerned about liberal democracy, about citizenship, that everybody should be equal under one law, and there should not be second-class citizens, then we have to, in the fight against anti-Semitism, I would argue, speak very loud and very clear against any reactionary force that wants to destroy democracy and harm its citizens. Thank you.